Let's talk about free voluntary reading. This is a routine I have incorporated into kind of my weekly set of routines, but I know it can be overwhelming or a little bit scary to just get started when you're thinking about, I have students who don't even like to read in English. How could I possibly get them to read in Spanish, right? So we're going to talk about free voluntary reading with a little bit of a beginner's guide in this video. Hey, it's Ashley, aka Señorita Spanish, where I provide easy-to-use resources to save you time and energy while you're lesson planning. If you're new here, welcome, and if you're not new here, welcome back. I just want to make sure that you know that links to everything that I mentioned in this video will be down in the description box below. So I already have a video where I talk about how to build your classroom library for free, so we're not going to talk too much about what is actually in your library, like what your students are actually reading in this video. Instead, it's going to be more about setup, expectations, procedures, that kind of thing. I'm going to go through that, and then I'm going to look at some frequently asked questions that I often see surrounding this topic and just like drive through those. Okay, let's get started. So I want to just start by sharing what it looked like in my own classroom when I did this. So in my classroom, we did FVR, or free voluntary reading, one time a week for 5 minutes at a time, which really doesn't seem like that much, and it's really not a whole lot, and that's okay. I did this right along with my other daily routines like weekend chat, música miércoles, special person, and I do have a video where I go more in depth into all of my routines that I'll make sure to link up here for you on the screen. FVR goes something like this. Choose something to read, read for 5 minutes. And I know those two sentences sound pretty simple, but we actually spend quite a bit of time talking about them, so let's dig into them a little bit more. The first sentence is choose something to read, and that's really not as simple as it sounds, right? How do we get our students to choose something to read that is the right fit for them? Like, we don't want to just pick out a book and hand it to them because that's not their choice, right? This is free choice reading, but we want them to find something that's the right fit. So I spend a lot of time talking to my students about what is the right fit, like what does that look like for them? I got a handout from BRYCE HEDSTROM'S website, and I post that language for them and I talk through it for them. I'll put it right here for you on the screen so you can see it. And like I said, that is a free download from his website. I'll make sure to link that down below in the description so you can grab it. We also used reading resources that were sent home with my coworkers' younger elementary kids. When we were first starting FVR, my coworkers' kids were in first grade and they were getting sent home materials talking to them about how to choose what to read. And it actually wound up being a really great resource for our own students that we kind of adapted and talked to them about. Every Tuesday we started off with a reminder of those expectations, and it did get a little faster, but I wanted them to know what I want. After a reminder of those expectations, I would dismiss students by groups, and I would just say things like, if your birthday is in month. Eventually we worked up to, it's Tuesday, pick up your book, then find your spot. But at first, like for the first quarter of doing FER, I wanted to review the expectations before they even touched their books. Once everybody has their reading material, we start the timer and we read. Okay, on to the facts. First and foremost, how often do people do this? And I already mentioned I did this once a week for 5 minutes. But people do this differently. Some people start every single day with 5 to 10 minutes. Some people just do it twice a week. Some people do it once a week, and that's fine, right? Everybody's going to look a little bit differently. It just kind of depends on how much space you have in your schedule. At what age or level do you recommend starting FVR? I personally started it in level 1, but not right away at the beginning. We found that waiting at least a quarter really helped make sure our students had a good amount of language in so that they were actually able to read the things that they were picking up. So waiting at least a quarter, and then there was one group where we were like, we just had some really crazy schedule stuff happening, and we just decided to wait the full first semester before we started, and that was fine, right? They didn't need to be rushed into that. Just kind of judge what your students are capable of and the books that you have available to them. Like if the books that you only have available are pretty high level, you're gonna wanna wait a little bit because otherwise they're not gonna be successful. How do you sort your novels? I personally did not sort them at all, not by genre, not by level. I don't have stickers on any of my books, nothing like that at all. I didn't like the idea of like pre-categorizing them into like levels because I didn't want them to be like, oh, I'm reading a purple book and you're reading a green book. Yeah, I just didn't like that idea. I also didn't sort them by genre just because I have a really hard time with that. Like sometimes it's like, oh, sci-fi, but fantasy, but not, but whatever, you know? So I just put them out. Also, I was a traveling teacher, so I was like putting out and taking down my library like several times a day. So the thought of like also categorizing it while I was doing that was just too much. So that didn't happen. How do you prepare your students to begin reading books? How do you help them pick out the right ones? What do you do to give them to be successful? Personally, we talked a lot about being able to understand the book. Like if you're reading a book and you have no idea what's happening, that's not the right book for you. And we also talked about how it's totally okay to be like, and then put it back and then pick out a new one the next time. If you pick a book, you're reading it for that whole 5 minutes, but next week you're gonna pick a different one. How do I hold them accountable for FVR? I don't really do that, which kind of sounds silly. BRYCE HEDSTROM does have a rubric. I haven't checked it out a whole lot. I'll make sure to, again, link to his site with his resources down below. I personally did not love the idea of like, you know, using any sort of rubric or grading system or like evaluation or test along with their free reading because I just wanted them to enjoy reading. Probably the biggest thing that we did during FVR is after the 5 minutes are all done, before we put the books away, I would just throw up a question for them to discuss in their small groups. And it might be something like, tell your group one thing that happened in the book today. Tell them if you're going to keep reading that next week. Would you recommend this book? How many weeks in a row have you read this book? Are you going to reread this book? Like those kinds of questions. And then while they're discussing that with their small group, I'm just circling around the room, I'm listening to their conversations, and I'm getting a feel for what are they actually getting out of the book, or are they not getting anything? And then I can kind of chime in with like, well, hey, you know, if you didn't really get anything from this, maybe switch it out next time. I would also consider building up stamina. When you're talking about accountability with the FVR, something to really consider is reading stamina. And this is something that my mom, the kindergarten teacher, talks to me about a lot as she's working on reading with her students throughout the year. And then when they get into the part of their year, they really do have reading, like they really are capable of reading, but it's hard for them to sit and focus for a long amount of time. So she has talked to me about how they start with just like this much time and how they gradually increase the time that they are reading silently as a class as the year goes on. And I think that's something that's really important to consider, is that our students, especially with the way our brains work now with cell phones and technology and everything, they might not be capable yet of sitting and focusing on one thing for 5 minutes. I have found personally, when I'm reading at home on the couch, if my phone is available, like every few paragraphs, I'm like, oh, phone, just out of the blue. How do you implement FVR with student buy-in? I know some people before FVR actually starts. So maybe this is the quarter before you're starting FVR with your ones. Maybe this is the week before your twos are getting back into it. Any of those kinds of things. They might do like a book talk where they'll pull a book off their shelf and they'll kind of show the cover and they'll show the back, and then maybe they'll flip through it and they'll talk about it a little bit, and then they'll just pass it around so students can kind of check it out. If you Google book tasting, I'm sure a ton of things will pop up. It's kind of a thing a lot of English teachers do, where they'll put out a bunch of their books and they'll do like kind of a rotating speed date session where students get to check out the books and like rate them and rate their interest on them. Do you thoroughly read every reader you have on your classroom library so you have a good understanding of the plot? Ideally, yes. Sometimes when you're online, you might see the cover of a book and you might see the back of a book and you might get to see like, I don't know, 2 words, and you're going, how do I know if this is a good fit for my students or not? So something that I've been working on is a playlist of videos where I show you what's inside and I talk about the language and I talk about the plot. I try to give kind of warnings. Like there's a few books that I have on my classroom library that are pretty, grief heavy. And if you have a student who's gone through some sort of tragedy in their life recently or not, you probably want to warn them about that book before they pick it up. Things like that I'm trying to include in that playlist. So that's my goal with that playlist. I'll make sure to link one of the examples here for you on the screen if you wanted to check that out. How do you get students to read for 10 minutes without asking to go to the bathroom? There's that expectation piece again, right? It's Tuesday, we're gonna read our books, we're gonna read them for 5 minutes, and you're not allowed to go to the bathroom during that time. You are a grown human who is aware of your needs or whatever. And does that mean like I don't let students go to the bathroom before class starts on Tuesdays because they might come in a little bit late? No. But if a kid needs to go to the bathroom, let them go. I just don't let them go once class has started. You can wait 3 more minutes. It'll be okay. What's the best way to assess FVR? The most that I usually do is that one quick question at the end and just kind of listening to them discuss it, right? Would you recommend this book? Yes or no? Are you planning on reading this book again next week? Yes or no? Any of those kinds of things that are just really simple questions, and just listening to them as they walk around before we pack up the books and move on to the next part of the lesson. What's the best schedule for FVR? I kind of talked about this in the beginning of the video. Everybody does this differently. I found that I liked the once a week and then just giving them that option as like a fast finisher, right? So we would do this as a scheduled class once a week at the beginning of class on Tuesdays. However, right, say on Wednesday, a student finished their work quickly and are like, they don't have other homework to do, or maybe they don't want to do the other homework that they have and they want to go pick up their book. They are welcome to go read their FVR book just for funsies whenever they want, provided they're done with their other stuff that we had to do that day. How to best support readers as they're working on their own. Talk to them about the tools in the book, right? The glossary, the pictures, the footnotes, all of those things. Make sure they know how to use them. Talk to them about what is really comprehensible, right? If they can only understand 2 words out of 70, not comprehensible, they should be able to understand 98% of what they're reading. That's what we're looking for here. Talk to them about how it's okay to abandon ship on a book. I think it's okay to say, I'm not into this book, and just like be done with it. And talking to them about that attitude is a good thing. But one of my favorite techniques to do is to include our classroom stories in printable form for them to read, especially if we've done kind of like a story asking where the different class periods have really similar stories, but different characters or different details. It's fun to include all of those different versions of the same story in one book or like one packet for the students to pick up and read during FVR, because they're likely to be successful with it because, right, you worked with it as a class, but they love hearing like, oh, 6th period said this instead, like ha ha ha. Like they love seeing that, and it kind of encourages that creativity when we're doing story asking again in the future, because they know like, oh, really good details make it into the classroom library. There we go. I also wanted to remind you that I do have that video where I talk about resources for building your classroom library for FVR. I'll make sure to link to that down in the description box below. This video is also part of a series that I'm working on using classroom readers in your classroom. So make sure to subscribe to see upcoming videos with content like which readers do I recommend for each level and how to use readers as a novel for a whole class unit. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.